I will begin with giving some general perspectives on the reality of Hispanic youth and young adult ministry, some statistics at the very beginning, and then I would like to move into what we are offering and trying to do nationwide, and how we are working in the different places, so that that you have the two perspectives. One of them will be kind of what are we trying to do with this population, and then how are we trying to face the situation. So one of the things is what Hoffman was saying is about the ages that we have in our population, in the Catholic population, and where the challenge is and how are we going to face it. Because if you see, the Hispanic is the pale bars, and this is the mainstream population. And if you look at the older generations, we have very small amount of people. That means that for many, many years, the amount of leaders in the Catholic Church, Hispanic leaders, were very few, because even the population didn't have too many. But then you move into the 40s, and this generation has very few people really in the field. Mostly are immigrants. Many of these people here in the leadership, we are immigrants. Like in California, maybe that 80 or 85% are immigrants. The same will be in Miami. In other places, might be that they have a little bit more percentage of native, but we will see something in regard to that, because that's part of the challenge that we have. Here we have the ages that are really raising children, and you can see, that they are already even equal or a little bit larger than the Anglo, I will say the European population. But when you look at the children, then you can see that we are already significantly more. So what does this mean? This means that the mainstream church is preparing really to minister to the senior population and to the baby boomers, and moving and pushing there. And we are going to see other graphs that will give you a better perspective on this. So the other problem that we have is that you see this little thing about the Asian, Black, and other. That's the percentage of Catholics that are African American, Native American, and Asian American all together. Now, the church has taken what we consider in Hispanic ministry a very bad path of talking and grouping all the Hispanic people with all the different ethnic groups and talking about multicultural ministry. In reality, our church, I say, is not multicultural, it's bicultural, with the presence of people from many other cultures. But by joining the Hispanic presence together with these other minorities and then dividing the pie between all of us, there is a significant diminishing of resources for Hispanic ministry throughout the country. And many of the leaders are now, instead of having Hispanic offices or Hispanic ministry to do, they have to do multicultural ministry. And that means serving people from all the other ethnic groups that are present in a particular diocese or parishes. That has really diminished the amount of care for the Hispanic population. So at this time, we are in that very bad moment. One of the things is looking at the future with the projection of the number of children that we have in the Hispanic community. And you are going to look at it from the perspective of the generations here in this country, and also, just taking away the idea of the immigration. If the immigration doesn't continue, still I'm going to show you what does it mean to be Hispanic church. And so this will be more or less the proportion for in 2050, and it will be a Hispanic church. Now, how are we preparing for that? And that is the tremendous challenge. So this is a graph, and you can see it by generations. This is the immigrant generation, okay? And the immigrant generation, the larger portion will be between the 20s and, say, the 45, 48, and then this is the native, the second generation. And of course, the second generation, most of it is citizen. They have been born in this country. And many of these little ones, they came very, very young, and all their education is going on in this country. Now, we have now the challenge of more than 50% of our population being native, being educated by immigrants, without the support, the appropriate support to learn how to deal with education as an immigrant in a different country in which you don't know the system, you don't have too many clues on how to help. It's a different language, it's a different situation, so we have very large challenges. These are the pyramids by ages and by groups, and you can see the general Hispanic population has a base that is larger, then it goes a little bit smaller, then at the age in which the immigrants come is larger again, and we have a very small, the adult population. The why not Hispanic has a very different shape. The larger amount is in the middle, and then it goes down. This is the Hispanic foreign-born. These are the immigrants. Very few in the top, very few in the lower parts, and a significant amount in the young adulthood. So these young adults make up today most of the young adult church, but they are not being catered as such. The pastoral care is not enough. And here you see the Hispanic United States born, a perfect pyramid, and these are the kids that are now citizens. So this is the, even if we don't have more immigration, this is the base from which we will grow from here, already. Here we will have the comparison to the white non-Hispanic, and you will see that it's practically the same, 46% for the white not Hispanic and 45.5%. But the problem is the complexity that we have, because we have different generations with very different issues. And so that makes it a tremendous challenge for us. So when you are in Hispanic ministry, you have to be catering to youth and young adults. But in addition, you have, on top of that, to be catering to the Vietnamese, to the African American, to the Asian American that are in your place. Practically it dissolves, and the ministry gets extremely, extremely weak. In many places, like here in the Archdiocese of Boston, we don't have anybody serving Hispanic youth and young adults. It's just nobody in the diocese. There are dioceses, like, for example, the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston is the second largest Hispanic diocese in the country. The first person named to be ministering to this population was about 4 years ago. Okay, and so the challenge is tremendous across the nation, and the efforts that we need to do in order to minister to this population is very, very large. So here will be the percentage for the Hispanic young adults. So you see 45% in the mainstream and 47% in the Hispanic population, and in this case, a larger proportion of Hispanic-born first generation and more than first generation. So this is where I was saying that most of the parents nowadays are, a very large proportion are either one or the other one is a foreigner trying to educate children in this country. Now, to add to that complexity, I have to stay here. Okay. To add to that complexity is that the concept of jóvenes or the concept of youth and young adults are not equal in the mainstream culture and in the Latino culture. And this has been one of the major, major problems that we had. When I was in catechesis, that I worked in catechesis for about 12 years, you know, it was a challenge all the time trying to see how do we minister to the kids, and how do we minister in the language of the home, and how do we train the parents at catechists or, you know, educators in faith. But when I moved to ministry with youth and young adults, the major challenge is that the age and the way of conceptualizing those ages are completely different in the mainstream than in the Hispanic community, and that poses an additional problem. Like, for example, for us, adolescentes, the adolescents finish more or less at 15, 16 years old. And then we move into the concept of jóvenes, that is the single people until around 30. If adolescents or young people marry, then they are not jóvenes anymore. They are padres jóvenes. They are parents that are young parents. And so what happens is that concept of jóvenes from here to here doesn't exist in the United States in the same way. What happens here is you are adolescents or teenagers, and now there is a lot of theories about late adolescents that go into older ages. But what happens is the 18 years old is like magic, and suddenly you are a young adult, and like the National Pastoral Plan for Young Adult Ministry considers singles and married, divorce, and widows with children or without children, and really is an age span. In the case of the Latino population, same as most of the cultures in the world, we have this concept of jóvenes. And so what happens is this concept is when people usually, when they are single at that age, they have a lot of energy, and that's the age of discerning vocation, that's the age of looking for marriage. That's an age that is extremely, extremely active. This is not understood in the United States. And we have a lot of problems at the parish and at the diocesan levels. A lot of times they intend to have, they said, let's integrate all young people together. Well, but what happened is that in Hispanic ministry, the jóvenes ministry, 16 to 30, is the one that is more developed because it's developed by the immigrants, and it's developed in Spanish. In contrast, in English, the one that is more developed is youth or teenagers, youth ministry. And so what happened in a particular diocese or parishes, they said, let's integrate all of them. How can we integrate these jóvenes that most of them are workers, you know, immigrants, Spanish speaking, into the youth that are the children of parents, that usually is middle and upper class ministry, you know, and of course, there is no way. And so there is the concept of we need to integrate them into one group. And that's one of the major struggles that we have. And we say, no, we don't need to integrate it into one group. We need to integrate them into the life and mission of the church. That's where they need to be integrated. Now, if we don't allow for a ministry that is developed for these people, according to their own pastoral issues, according to their language, according to the spirituality, according to the way they live their faith in their homes and in Sunday liturgy, what happens is that they tend to vote with the feet and they don't return back. And so many, many times the biggest problem is integration or really on church kids. And the studies that we have that have been done in the country in the last years, mainly the National Study on Youth and Religion, that was a study made by the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, has proved that from all the different religious groups and the different ethnic groups, Catholic Hispanics are the worst attended teens, although they have the largest index of religiosity. And so, you know, it's amazing. I have one book in here that presents all those kind of statistics, but it is really very sad. Like, for example, in the case of the teens in the mainstream, there is a direct correlation between the parents are involved in the parish, then the kids are involved. In our case, there is not that correlation. For parents that are involved, the kids are uninvolved. It's kind of the opposite. And in certain way, it is because of they have these expectations, their parents are doing this, the parish do not respond to them, so they go out. And so we have a very negative experience on the children of parents that are involved in the parish in general. So at this time, we are trying to focus on the Hispanic youth, but many times people want to integrate them here, and it really depends on the situation. If you are in a suburban area, then it is the social classes, the ones that clash, because it will be the children of the bankers, the professional people, and then the children of the janitorial service people, and they cannot be together many times. And so, so that's an additional challenge that we have to minister to this population. One of the blessings that we have in Hispanic ministry is what we call Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, that is the ministry of the young people per se. And the model that we follow in Latin America, that is also very different from the model here in the United States, is that the young person is the minister. It's a peer ministry-led ministry. And the adult is an advisor. And so what happened is that the ones that plan are the young people. The ones that are the leaders are the young people. We call them protagonistas de la pastoral. It's the pastoral ministry of a young person. And so it is very much focused on the vocation and the mission of the young person. And because of that, it really elicits a lot of energy. So one of the situations that we had is many times the young adult Hispanics trying to develop a ministry in the parish, particularly if they have that experience in Latin America, or if they come from a different part of the country where they have the experience, and at the same time, the parish is saying, no way, because you are dividing the church. And you are dividing the church because you want to form one group for these people, and we already have a youth ministry for these people. And in the East Coast, that is one of our major problems. And so it continuously, because it's not generally understood, then it is a lot of times really they kill the efforts of the young person. And because we haven't had enough formation at the ministerial level, then you don't have enough advisors, and the young adult leaders are trying to do their efforts on their own. And so that's very revealing. Like last Saturday, when we had here around 90-something people for the full day workshop, a lot of them were young. I would say 60% were young people. And I was even amazed, the amount of males, tremendous amount. And if you go to Hispanic masses, you can see the amount of young adults that are around the walls and waiting in there. You don't see that in the mainstream church. Tons of young adults. So we have a very different challenge in the two populations. In ours is people knocking the door in the parish, wanted to do ministry, and the church, the structure saying, no way, you cannot do that. In the mainstream, you continue to read all the different, how do we attract the young adults? So here we have the young adults coming to the ministry and saying, no way, you don't have to do it, because then you are divided the church. But in fact, what we are saying when we don't allow them to do that is, really, we don't want you to be active in the church. And, the Protestant churches and the other groups are really capitalizing on that. And they are really taking this apostolic seal. And many of the young people will tell you, I want to do something for my people. I want to do something for the younger ones. I have found Christ, and I want to deliver Christ to other ones. If I cannot do it in my church, I will go and do it in another place. And that's very, very painful for us. So at this particular time, there is a national organization called La Red, National Catholic Network of Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, that we founded a group of us about maybe 12 years ago. And with that organization, we were able to organize a first encounter, national encounter of Hispanic youth and young adult ministry. Here is just the index of the conclusion book. If you are interested, it's a book that I recommend. It's bilingual. And this was a process that we started from the parish, trying to do a needs assessment. What do people want to do, you know, their aspirations, their ideals, their challenges. And then the pastoral ministries that guides our ministry, the different pastoral models that we have in place. And so these statistics come from the National Encuentro, in which they were about 2,000 delegates from 24 or 29 dioceses. In some of the dioceses, they followed the process since the beginning. In other ones, they didn't. But you can see here that the primary language spoken in their groups that they were representing from all the nation, English was only 6%. Spanish, 67, and bilingual, 25. You can see that groups with people under 18, only 7%. Everyone over 18, 39%, and mixed groups, 39%. Now, another of the challenges that we are facing is that now with all the requirements for safe environment, in many dioceses, what they are doing is destroying these groups that are for the two groups together. And what happened is, when you have the adolescents together with the young adults, they behave like young adults. They grow, you know, and they reflect and they behave. You don't have, rarely you have behavioral problems. But when you have only adolescents together, then the situation gets a lot more difficult. And we don't have ministers, youth ministers, to minister to adolescents. And so what happens when you destroy these groups that are together? You are leaving the adolescents alone without any option. And that is reflected on the studies nationwide. And that's, I say, a capital sin of our church today, because that's when the kids need a lot more support, and that's when the parents need support, and that's why we have that reverse statistics about our teenagers. So you see here, you know, most of them, the young adults, speak Spanish. 74% can speak English, but only about 61% are fully bilingual. And so what happens with all these new generations that are coming up, you know, that are born in this country? And so you have now people that kind of speak the language, but cannot really relate, and we have a language and cultural problem in addition to the age gap. Of course, the ministry is done by the immigrants, a little bit with people in the first generation, but you can see how poor has been the ministry with people with more generations in the United States. It just doesn't exist. And so this is the effect of a lot of discrimination and a lot of marginalization for years and years, and a lack of understanding on how to deal with the Latino young people in our church. You need to put this in a larger context. If we say that about 50% of the Catholics under age 30 are Hispanic, we see that about 38% of all Catholics in the United States are Hispanic. Only 16% of Catholics with BA degrees or higher are Hispanic. And so when we are talking about leadership, the need for education is tremendous. It's tremendous, and we need to start addressing that, and Boston College is doing a very good job, and we need significant more resources in that. 15% of the seminarians are Hispanic, so we have a crisis of clergy, but we have a larger crisis of Hispanic clergy. In comparison to 50% of the population that is coming here, only 15% 11% of deacons, 9% of bishops, 6% of priests are Hispanic, and from them, 83% are foreign-born. That is the same that happens now with the Hispanic lay leadership. We are about 85% foreign-born. And so in certain way, the church in the United States has not learned how to elicit the leadership and the faith development of their native Latinos. And so I don't have the statistics here, but first immigrants, we have about maybe 76 or 78% are Catholic. When you go to the next generation, it's about 60. When you go to further generation, it's less than 50. So the more time you are in the United States, the less Catholic you are. So yes, we are a very large group. The young people are requesting services. If the parishes do not respond, if the church do not find the ways to respond, that is going to continue. Now, is that what we want? Is that what we should be doing? Only about 4% of parish lay ecclesial ministers are Hispanic. So the problem that we have also is that people in the pews, people in the parishes, they don't have a clue how to deal with the Hispanic population. And in service that has been done for youth ministry, that's one of the areas in which youth minister says that they need, is one of the most weak areas that they have, dealing with kids from a different culture. And you can see here, from the United States born priests, only 1% are Hispanic. So that means, everything is parallel. We don't deal with the Latinos that are born in this country. This is the effect. Now, we stop immigration, so where are we going to get our own ministers, with this, for this population? And one of the things is, how do we deal with a culture that is different from ours? And we like to see the culture as an onion with different layers. And many times what happens in a parish or by ministers or whoever is looking at the visible aspects of the culture and consider that all things are the same. They dress with the same jeans, they more or less use the same cups, they have their boom boxes, they hear this music that is general. So we assume that because they look somehow similar, they are similar. But we don't enter into the next layer, that is traditions and costumes. And these traditions and costumes are really formed by the system of the value system. And that value system is really created by the institutions. And, the institution draws from the worldview. Now, what happened? What happens is that when Hispanics come, for the immigrant, the first crash in the United States, according to their faith, is with the church as an institution. We come with certain worldview about ourselves and about ourselves as Catholics. And the first place we want to go is to the parish because we feel we are members of the church. And suddenly we know that we are not members of the church. And we start a lot of problems starting there. Like, you have to register. You're a registered Catholic. Sure, I am a registered Catholic. Okay. I remember that when I went to register my kids in the Catholic school. Oh, but you are not registered in the parish. Of course I am registered in the parish. But of course in Mexico you only register one time in your life in the parish in which you are baptized. And that's for most of Latin America. So of course you are registered. Everything goes to that parish and you are free to move. Because the church is yours. It's not the parish that is yours. And so what happened is even the language. Learning that I was not registered, it took me about 6 or 7 years until I was really moving my kids from the public school into the Catholic school system. I learned that I was going to Mass daily, but I was not registered. I was not a member of the parish. And in addition, I was sent by the principal of the school to move into the parish in which I was reading in a different parish, because that was my parish. And that was my experience in two places. The first place I arrived was Michigan State University, and when I arrived and wanted to register my kids in the religious education program in there, they told me that no, that was not my parish. My parish was in the other side of the tracks. And I said, no way, I lived right here. Yeah, but this is not your parish. I couldn't understand anything until I arrived to live in California. And then I learned that, you know, people do not want to include you in that particular parish. I was one of the first families in my parish that was Latino. And it took us about maybe 14 years in order to be accepted in the parish. And so what happened is you look for the places in which you are accepted and you move if you have a very strong faith. Now, if you don't have a strong faith, you know, you give up. It's too much of an ordeal. So that's one of the things. Inculturation, really, bringing the gospel to the people, is bringing the gospel across all the different layers in the culture to the core, in which your value system, in which your attitudes, in which the way you see yourself in the world is really looked at, and that's where you accept the good news. You know, but in order to work with a different culture of yours, you have to really learn to cross all these different layers. And so just by having potlucks or multicultural masses in which you are dressed very nicely, it doesn't arrive to the core. I remember when I moved to Oakland in the catechetical department, the sister said, well, Carmen, now that you are here, you are going to come and organize that everybody from your culture and the African American and everybody comes dressed very nicely in their own dresses to have a wonderful liturgy, closing liturgy. And I said, sister, I would love to do that if you dress as a pilgrim, or if you come, you know, dress as an Indian or something, or an Uncle Sam, you know. And she just went, said, what are you saying? Said, oh, because we are Mexican, with dress or without dress, you know. And those are our folkloric dresses and are very, very nice, but we don't live in those ones. So why are we going to have a multicultural mass only when people need to come out and bring from their closet one of those things to be valued? So can we organize some intercultural exchange in which we can really go and talk about all this? You know, because what is happening is that we are putting really a kind of a weird seal into what multicultural is in the church. We can bring something from our traditions and costumes and bring different dishes, and then we feel we are doing a great multicultural work. No, that's not true. You know, because we have not entered into the real dialogue and real intercultural, cross-cultural communication. So for our teens and for our young people, in different levels, they have 4 different influences that are the dominant culture. It really depends on where you are living. We were talking about people, for example, in Lawrence, you know, around here. Do they really have a lot of opportunities to be integrated into the mainstream? Is Los Angeles? Nope. South Stockton? Nope. There are not white Europeans in there. You know, so how do they integrate into the mainstream? They integrate maybe in the school system a little bit, but the school system in the inner cities and in many of those places are terrible. You know, they are really for failure. So they are integrated into the worst part of the dominant culture, if they have any dominant culture in there. Because they are, in many, many places, they are together, and so you integrate into the barrio, you know. And and the Hispanic cultures, it really depends how many Hispanic cultures are in there. Is there the Puerto Rican, the Dominican, the Venezuelan, the Centro American? So how do you integrate and how do you form one Hispanic or Latin American culture here in the United States? That's another challenge. For the young people, it's easier to relate to the different people, but for the adults, it's not. And so what happened is many of the prejudices passes from the older generation. So how do we deal with that if we do not have enough services for those people? You know, how are they doing the education of the second generation? Then we have the pop culture. But the pop culture belongs to the dominant, to the youth, and to the Hispanic. And so now we have, you know, all the opportunities to watch TV, to hear radio, to have internet, and to receive all the pop cultures from the different places. And so what is the combination that is happening on the young person? And how do we deal that in evangelization and pastoral care? And it's going to be very, very difficult, very different from one group than the other ones. The same about the youth culture. So in the Hispanic arena, we have kind of identified 4 different groups that, of course, none of them are 100%, the characteristics are not 100% clear in each one. But it gives an idea of, within our own group, what is happening. Some of the people we have identified as immigrant workers, mostly Spanish-speaking, mostly Mexican, many undocumented, about 75%, 74 Catholic. Many seek the moral and spiritual support from the church, mostly are at the lower end of the economic spectrum, interested in forming peer groups and communities because they are alone here. Many immigrate alone. They don't have families. And for them, the Pastoral de Jóvenes is an extended family. So when you are destroying the opportunity to have these groups in the parishes, you are not only taking away the ministry for the young people, but you are taking away the opportunity to have a family. And so then they are very, very lonely. And that's one of the major complaints. But when they have these vibrant communities, they are not lonely. They can support each other. It's a completely different outlook, and many of those people really go together in life for many, many years. So they tend to have large families, but many of them in Latin America. And so what happened for many of them is that a large proportion of their salaries go to Latin America. And so they are young adults that have hard works here, a small income, and still a proportion of that income is either sustaining their younger brothers and sisters here or is sent to Latin America. And so try to put these ones, these immigrant workers, together with mainstream youth who are middle upper classes. It's impossible. You know, their mindsets are in very different ways, very different places. Then we have what we call the identity seekers. The identity seekers will be the great majority of the adolescents, mostly bilingual, mostly born in the United States, children of immigrants. Some struggle to stay in high school and graduate. Many of them have that problem, may find hope in work or family relationships. Some seek refuge in alcohol, drugs, or sexual promiscuity. Few will go to college, low self-esteem, emotional, unmotivated, apathetic. So this group is the one that usually falls between the cracks and is the largest group, you know, that is coming up. Then you have the mainstream movers will be the children of professionals, you know, that move very well in the mainstream, or gifted kids, people that have the ability to really move forward, but they are a small group. And we lose them from the Hispanic perspective because they are integrated into the mainstream, usually because of the classism of Latin America and the racism of the United States together. They end up working with the mainstream groups, and we don't see them return back to the barrios to minister to their own people. And so what happened is many people that go to the Catholic high schools, Catholic universities, we don't have too many of them ministering to to their peers. So they enter into the general way of being in the Catholic Church here in the mainstream. And then we have the group of the gang members and high-risk youth. One of the things is that depending on the places, we may have something between the 5 and the 15% of the Latino involved in gangs or in high-risk situations. But what happened, it is, if we have 5 to 10% or 15%, but this is probably the 95% of what it is in the media. And so what we have is a misperception of all these groups, you know, and the situation thinking that most of our people are here, and yes, here they need a specialized ministry. But by thinking that most of them are here, we don't deal with these ministries that are significantly easier to deal with, you know. And if we can work with these ministries here, particularly these two, then we will have less amount of kids in this area. One of them, because these immigrant workers is the next, their children are the next generation of children native here, you know, citizens. And we have now the largest percentage of teen suicides in the United States are of Hispanics. The larger percentage of teenage pregnant girls is in the Hispanic community. Not the larger percentages of the abortion, because many of the Hispanic kids keep their children and their grandmothers help, or they try to deal with them. You know, so it's not in the area of abortion, but yes in pregnancy and yes in suicide. You know, and most of it is the second generation. And many of the second generation, what the specialists have said about the suicide rate is that the parents have come and worked very hard and have certain ideals. And they have put in the minds of the kids these ideals, but it's impossible for them to reach them. And because it's impossible for them to reach them, then the discouragement and the emotional problems come. And there is no people to help them. And so many of them are not these kids in here, are these identity seekers, the ones that end up taking away their life. And so what are we doing as a church? If we say that Jesus came for the poor and the marginalized, you know, are in these groups one of the more marginalized and more of the poor with the less amount of resources to really move forward? Why an archdiocese like Houston, or like many of them, like here, you know, they don't have anybody to take care of this population, to really make leadership formation for the people that want to be trained, to even bring the resources. You know, how come that the church structurally is not really set to minister to this population? So you can look into the different literature that I brought for you. There is I brought several pamphlets for you. There are really monographies. One of them has all these statistics and even more, you know, and so you can look at the statistics in the different areas and see the results of that national study on youth and religion. We were able to help in the study since the very beginning as an institute, and they gave us the opportunity to analyze all the Hispanic data, children and parents that were interviewed, you know, and really it's something that we really need to take at heart. Then you have another one that is called The Dynamics of Culture and Faith and Family in the Lives of Hispanic Teens and Their Implications in Youth Ministry. And some of these areas that I have taught about culture are developed here. And also, you know, what is the identity, these identity seekers that we were talking about? How is their identity formed in the different type of families that they are living at the different moments in their life? you know, the identity of the cultural identity of the young people changed throughout life. And their outlook and the way of portraying themselves in the world changed also across ages. So then we have one on Pastoral Juvenil Hispana, Youth Ministry and Young Adult Ministry, an updated perspective of 3 different pastoral realities, because as I said, you know, the vocabulary, the sociological groups are not the same. And so for a long time, we were not even able to speak ones with the other ones because we didn't have the vocabulary. If you cannot translate youth to jóvenes, and jóvenes is incorrectly translated as youth, you know, we were, for years, until our first bilingual book came out in 1994, all the time in the country we had been translated Pastoral Juvenil Hispana as Hispanic Youth Ministry. And it stays in the mind that we are only working with teens, and that's not true. You know, and so what happens is when you have that concept in mind, you have young adults, then you consider that the young adults cannot be on their own because you mistake them for youth. And of course, you know, the young adult is a very different person than a teen. But not understanding that concept is, has been very damaging. And the same happens with the word juvenil. I encountered several pastors that didn't want to have Pastoral Juvenil because juvenil is very similar to juvenile without the E. And so, and because of the concept of that we have only young kids and people in high risk, they didn't want to have them in the parishes, you know, and so either for one reason or the other one, you know, it's very difficult sometimes to allow to have Pastoral Juvenil in a parish. So, and also it has a chart comparing the educational systems in Latin America and in the United States. Then you have one welcoming Hispanic youth and jóvenes in Catholic parishes and dioceses to help how to do it. The pastoral model that we have developed in Instituto Fe y Vida in order to minister to this population, and it's bilingual, and all these resources are bilingual so that we can enter into communications ones with the other ones.